Running through the forest is my way of escaping reality. Every day as the sun began to set, I would put on my favorite running shoes and head out on my favorite trail through the woods. This daily routine helped me unwind from the stresses of everyday life. Running alone, I felt free and detached from my problems. The route I chose was about 10 kilometers long and led through a dense, quiet forest. The forest where I run is located in the northeastern part of the United States, on the border of New York and Vermont. It's a picturesque region full of vast forests, hills, and lakes, providing perfect conditions for outdoor sports. There are numerous hiking and running trails, but I always chose this one, leading through the deepest part of the forest, away from the beaten paths. In these areas, the forests are thick, and the trees grow close together, creating an almost impenetrable barrier for sunlight. This means that even during the day, there is a twilight ambiance. The ground is soft, covered with a thick layer of needles and leaves, and the air smells of moisture and earth. You can often hear the sound of streams and birds singing, creating a peaceful, almost idyllic atmosphere. Despite its beauty, the forest also has its dark side. In winter, when snow covers the ground, the trees look like grim sentinels, and the silence is almost oppressive. In summer, when fog rises over the wetlands, the forest becomes a place full of mysteries and unknown puzzles. It was in such an environment that I loved to run, far from civilization and daily problems. One day during my run, I noticed something strange. In the distance, at the edge of my trail, I saw a figure. It was an old woman in tattered rags. Her clothes were dirty and torn. I had never seen her here before, and the sight of her in this desolate place seemed extraordinary. The woman stood motionless, her silhouette almost unreal in the morning fog. As I got closer, I could see more details. Her face was distorted, covered with wrinkles and dirt. Her eyes had a dead, empty look, as if they were staring straight through me rather than at me. I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. Something about her posture and appearance stirred a primal, inexplicable fear in me. Nonetheless, I decided to keep running, trying to calm down and not think about what I had just seen. The further I moved away from the place where she stood, the faster my heart beat. I still had the image of that woman in my mind, and my mind searched for a logical explanation for what I had just witnessed. Maybe she was just a lost tourist? Maybe someone seeking shelter in the forest? Despite this, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, that I had just experienced something extraordinary and terrifying. The next day, during my run, I saw the same figure again. This time I was on a path running along a small stream, surrounded by dense bushes and trees that formed almost a tunnel of branches. The stream babbled quietly, and the leaves rustled with every step I took. When I looked to my right, I saw her again. She stood motionless between the trees at the edge of a clearing about 30 meters away. The woman seemed to be watching me from afar, behind the branches of trees that cast long, terrifying shadows on the ground. Her eyes, empty and expressionless, seemed to pierce through me, freezing my blood. Her face was like a mask, frozen in an expression of unspeakable sadness and anger. The skin on her cheeks was wrinkled and slack, resembling parchment. Her lips were dry and cracked, as if they hadn't tasted water for decades. Her hands, emaciated and claw-like, hung limply at her sides. I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. I had the impression that the temperature around me suddenly dropped, and the air became heavy and stuffy. Every step I took seemed louder, as if the echo of my feet reverberated throughout the forest, warning everyone of my presence. Nevertheless, I decided to keep running, trying to control my emotions. The unease never left me for a moment, and every rustle of leaves seemed louder than usual. That evening, I met my friend Mark in his garden, where we had prepared a bonfire. Mark often invited me to such evening gatherings where we could talk and relax after a day full of events. The fire crackled cheerfully, and we drank a few beers, talking about everything and nothing. When I told Mark about my encounter with the mysterious figure in the forest, his face took on a serious expression. His gaze was fixed on the fire, and his voice trembled slightly as he began his story. He recalled an old, dark legend about a mysterious old woman that his grandmother used to tell him. It was a story passed down from generation to generation in their family, full of horror and warning.
According to this tale, the woman disappeared many years ago. She was known in the area as a healer, but the villagers suspected her of witchcraft. One day, when several children went missing from the village, the desperate community gathered to find the culprit. The tracks led to her hut at the edge of the forest. To their horror, they discovered that she had devoured the children, as they found their remains in her home. Enraged and terrified, the villagers decided to mete out justice in the most brutal way. They burned her house, watching as the fire consumed the roof and walls, and the smoke rose to the sky like dark, angry clouds.
Mark continued, his voice growing more ominous.
But that wasn't enough. Their anger demanded more. They dragged her from the burning house, her screams mingling with the crackling flames, her face contorted in a grimace of pure terror. They led her to the depths of the forest, where an old, sprawling tree stood. Hanging her from a thick branch, they watched as her body twitched in the final convulsions of life. Her dead eyes stared into the darkness, as if searching for new victims. Before her death, she cursed the village community and vowed that one day she would return to devour the children of those responsible for her fate.
With Mark's tale, the fire in the bonfire seemed to dim, and the shadows cast by the flames danced around us, adding to the terrifying atmosphere. I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. Suddenly, the forest, which once was my refuge, became a place full of danger and unexplained phenomena. Mark looked at me with a serious expression.
Listen, it's better not to run in that forest. It's not worth the risk.
Mark's words sounded ominous in the dimming light of the bonfire. His warning made me feel even more uneasy. I still had the image of that woman in my head, and the thought that the forest, which once gave me peace, had now become a place full of unknown dangers. Despite everything, I did not intend to give up my passion for running. The forest near my home still had many safe paths that I could explore. However, that clearing where I saw the old woman became a place I decided to avoid at all costs from then on. 2 days later, I was running a familiar route, trying to calm my nerves. As I ran, I felt increasingly relaxed until suddenly, I felt something strange, like an icy chill piercing my body. I turned around and saw a figure running toward me in the distance. At first, I thought it was another runner, but intuition told me there was something strange and unnatural about this person's movements. Her steps were too stiff, almost mechanical, as if each part of her body moved independently. Her legs moved heavily, and her arms swung in a disturbing, unsynchronized manner, as if they were loosely attached to the rest of her body. Her head was held in an unnaturally high position, and the gaze, which I clearly felt on me, was fixed directly on me. With each step, the figure came closer, and I felt a growing unease. My heart began to beat faster, and my breath became heavier. When the figure got closer, I recognized the old woman from Mark's legend. Her empty, dead eyes seemed to pierce through me, radiating a black, bottomless void. Her face was twisted in a grimace of pure hatred, and a cruel, almost insane smile played on her lips. I realized I had to run. I started running as fast as I could, trying to reach home quickly, but I knew I still had 5 kilometers to go. I felt my muscles burning and my heart pounding like a hammer. Every now and then I looked back and the old woman kept getting closer. Her steps grew louder, and the sound of her heavy breathing echoed through the forest like a sinister warning. I felt her cold, rotting breath on my neck as if death itself was chasing me through this cursed forest. With every step, her presence became more tangible, and the sounds she made grew more terrifying. I heard the snap of branches breaking under her inhuman strength, and the rustle of leaves as if the earth itself was warning me of the impending evil. I knew that if I stopped, I would never see the world outside the forest again. I kept running, fighting the mounting fatigue, hoping to escape this nightmare. Every step was a battle with my own body, but I had no choice. I had to keep running. Suddenly, ahead of me, I saw a flash of light. It was a street lamp at the edge of the forest, a sign that I was approaching the end of the trail. With newfound hope in my heart, I increased my pace, trying to reach the safety that civilization offered. But the old woman was getting closer. Her screams grew louder, and I felt my strength starting to wane. My heart pounded in my chest and my legs were failing me. Then suddenly, out of nowhere, I heard a thud. Something heavy had fallen to the ground. I looked back and saw that the old woman had tripped over a tree root. She fell to the ground, writhing and screaming in helpless fury. I knew this was my only chance. With the last of my strength, I sprinted, ignoring the pain coursing through my body. I reached the edge of the forest where a street lamp awaited me. Its light pierced the darkness and I collapsed into its safe circle of illumination. I turned and saw the old woman still lying on the ground, trying to get up. Her dead eyes glared at me with hatred, but she could no longer reach me. Then something incredible began to happen. The tree roots, as if alive, started to entwine her body. At first, thin as snakes, they slithered under her clothes, coiling around her legs and arms. She struggled, but the roots were relentless. With each movement, more roots tangled into her flesh, piercing her skin like tentacles. Her terrifying screams pierced my ears, sending chills down my spine. She cried out for help, her voice filled with horror and pain that cut through me. Her nails, dirty and long, clawed at the ground, but nothing could save her now. The roots pulled her down with unyielding force, and her body convulsed in agonizing spasms. I watched as her face began to fade into the darkness of the earth, her empty eyes glaring at me with increasing hatred. Her mouth opened in a final, silent scream that seemed to transcend time and space. The sight of her vanishing figure was terrifying, yet brought a sense of relief. Finally, the earth swallowed her completely and the forest fell silent as if nothing had happened. I stood there trembling, traumatized by what I had just witnessed. I knew I would never be able to return to the forest. Running, which once was my passion and escape, had become the source of my worst nightmare. Never again, I whispered to myself. I will never go to the forest again. I knew that night had changed me forever. Every thought of the forest, every sound reminiscent of rustling leaves, would bring back memories of this nightmare. I left the place I once loved, determined to leave behind the terrifying past.